And welcome to the seventh of the panel discussions on for BFOT, the discussion forum for online teaching. Today's panel discussion is a very interesting one and something that is bothering a lot of us, both in the sciences as well in the social sciences, because one of the most important things that students can get from our college education is a hands-on experience of doing things in a laboratory. The pandemic has affected us in many ways, but the worst hit have been those who like to go to the labs and do experiments, whether it is physics, chemistry, biology, or in the social sciences, where, in sociology, field research, economics, data collection. All these are essential ways in which a budding scholar would learn the tools of his or her trade. And not being able to go to a laboratory has been a major problem for all of us. Those of us who run research labs, that's one of them. But those who teach laboratories, especially those who worry about the pedagogy of their subject via experiments, this has been a major setback. And in many cases, because people didn't have a very good idea about how long this entire pandemic was going to last, or the serious part of it, which is the lockdown and restriction on movement, the immediate thing seemed to be to just postpone this component of the learning to a later time when things would be quote unquote all right. Well, May came, June came, July came, and now I believe I've been told by good authority that it is the month of November. I have no clear idea that it is November because it all still feels like March. But nevertheless, the point is that the academic year is drawn to an end. Our normal routines are all completely bust, and there's no way in which we can have our experiments being postponed to the latter part of any semester. It's also not clear when colleges will open because every day brings new data and new horrors. Okay. Now, that said, I know that there are many people who are coping in some way or the other. There are ways in which we, as a human species, let alone as Indians, are very good at this business of jugaad. So we are able to do something or the other to make, to substitute this kind of experience for our students. Because one thing that, that Professor Madhurima, who has been running these discussions and panel discussions and all for the last 3 months or so, has, and I have learned via all the efforts that we have put in, is that the teachers of India, the teachers in colleges and universities, have absolutely done a brilliant job. The commitment of teachers to teaching and the amount that we as a community worry about our students learning has been absolutely phenomenal. And anybody who believes otherwise seriously needs to have a rethink. The amount of work that people have put in, the different kinds of efforts that people have put in, all of this has been absolutely spectacular and very, very commendable. In earlier parts of these panel discussions, we have looked at a variety of subjects. Some of you have been with us on earlier PDs. I know that there are many teachers who look and come to the PDs quite regularly. And in a subsequent one, just so that I can get a little plug in for the panel discussions that are going to come, there are a few that we have planned already. One of them is to listen to what the students have to say about online teaching and online learning. One of them is going to be to do with the mental health issues that many of our students and many of our teachers are facing at this point in time. And there's going to be stuff on research, and there's going to be stuff on different aspects of teaching. And very importantly, there's going to be one on performing arts. How do you teach dance and music online? All right. So this is a work in progress, and this is really a community-based initiative. So those, I'd encourage all of you all to keep coming back to these, because it's short meetings on Sunday afternoons. Not the best time, I know, but we don't have a lot of time otherwise. Okay. So today's panel discussion is on laboratories. How well can one teach? The practical experience online? And we have a very nice panel of people over here who are going to discuss this issue of virtual laboratories and online field work. Basically, how do you do practicals during the pandemic? Our panelists today are Aarushie Sharma, who teaches sociology at Hindu College at the University of Delhi; Aditya Vaishya, who teaches physics at Ahmedabad University; Venkatesh Choppella, who is in the Department of Computer Science and looks after the virtual labs at IIIT Hyderabad; Chandan Kumar, who teaches geology at the Central University of Kerala; and Shahin Sultana, who teaches social work at Pondicherry University. Right. I'd request all the panelists to have about, to restrict their comments to 10 to 12 minutes or so. And then we'll come back. There'll be questions on YouTube and so on and so forth. So with no further ado, Aarushie.
Yeah, good afternoon, all of you. It's really exciting for me to be here at this forum for online teaching. I think we're all dealing with such relevant questions right now, and we're all trying to make sense of how do we work with these contingencies that the pandemic has thrown upon us. How do we make teaching, more meaningful in these situations? And I think this is a very interesting question that the panel is proposing today. I come from the discipline of sociology. I've been teaching sociology at the Department of Sociology at Hindu College, University of Delhi. And this is a discipline that does have a component for the second and third year students of doing field work. They have papers on research methods, they have papers on ethnographies, where they are supposed to go and do collect data, come back, analyze the data, and then present their field reports, sometimes in the format of monographs, sometimes in the form of also visual methods. And this is where I am coming from. I'm coming from the discipline of sociology, thinking about how do we go about the questions of field and field work when we are going to be running some of these research courses for our students in the upcoming semester. So what I'm going to be doing, I'll try to divide my presentation into two parts. In the first part, so to largely discuss the modalities of online fieldwork, in the first part, I'll try to situate some of the questions that we are raising now in the context of disciplinary debates that emerged in the discipline of sociology and sociocultural anthropology in the 1980s. And in the second part of my presentation, I'll try to reflect on my plans and my fear and my apprehensions for online fieldwork with respect to one of the research courses I've been teaching at the University of Delhi. So I'll start with the first part of my presentation. Now, starting in the 1980s, mid-1980s, the discipline of anthropology went through a major self-critique. Questions were raised of the tradition of fieldwork, and fieldwork has been a hallmark of anthropology. So it was argued in this critical tradition that was rising that it's not so much the what, but it's the where of fieldwork that is often being left to common sense beyond reflexivity. So one started questioning the classical tradition of fieldwork that was largely based on Western and white anthropologists going to far away, quote unquote, exotic lands to study other cultures. So in this tradition, the field was largely seen as what the home was not. And farther the field was from one's home, the more objective and credible fieldwork was seen to be. Now, this assumption came under a severe critique in the 1980s and 1990s, and these critiques called attention to many problems with this tradition, such as an isomorphism of culture and place, where anthropologists were not only creating myths of isolated and unitary cultures, but also of them being contained in neat and bounded places. It's interesting to note that these critiques were emerging in the backdrop of a more intense globalization, global flow of people, commodities, ideas, and that made any assumption of unitary cultures and bounded places highly suspect. So, this critique that is emerging in the mid 80s and going on to the 90s, this critique started inviting anthropologists to rethink field and rethink fieldwork. It was argued that the field is not, what if we do not conflate the field with geographical locales out there? And what if we start seeing field as political locations situated in grids of relations? So this critique that I've just giving a brief glimpse into this very interesting disciplinary debate around field and fieldwork that emerged 35 years ago. The reason I'm discussing this debate is because this critique gave rise to more experimental traditions of doing fieldwork, more experimental ethnographies, multi-sited ethnographies, autoethnographies, multiple other sorts of researches where this sort of a separation between field and home, between the anthropologist and the other, were really called into question. So this debate was really pivotal in refashioning the discipline of anthropology and sociology. And it continues to be very relevant to our, very central to our syllabi today. I mean, even in our current courses, these are certain debates that are very central to our syllabus when we're teaching our students. So the reason that I am taking everybody back to 35 years ago to this story of a critique very central to anthropology is because I feel that this debate is becoming more relevant in today's time when the pandemic is forcing us to rethink our fields. It's forcing us to reevaluate fieldwork and think through how do we reach from our object of inquiry to empirical sites in the first place, with possibilities of moving in and out of these field sites now becoming foreclosed. I think this contingency is really forcing us to reimagine what field could be. And the question that I am trying to raise here is, what can we draw from some of these older debates, from this experimental tradition that came to the fore, and what can we add to this tradition in the light of today's challenges? So I'd like to give a glimpse into some examples of researches that have come out of more experimental traditions of doing fieldwork. There are some researchers now who do ethnographies of internet communities. So these are basically researches where the researchers have studied relations, dynamics of kinship, dynamics of inequality in digital communities. So if you think about it, what is the site of this researcher? What is the field of this researcher? This researcher is not really going to a physical location somewhere out there, somewhere very distant. The field of this researcher is this site on which these internet communities are based. So these are the sites that become the field for a researcher who's doing an ethnography of internet community. This researcher is probably studying chat room dynamics, gaming relations, etc. Another example, another emerging field that is coming up is ethnography of document, where researchers work with documents, follow people's contested meanings and reflections on these documents to understand the politics of documentation and identity. Media studies, of course, is giving us many examples of conducting research on old and new media technologies through employing these technologies. The study of discourse, and this has been so central to anthropology. To give an illustration, there are examples of sociologists studying discourses of nation and development by examining middle school textbooks, this textbooks that students read in schools, and the illustrations that these textbooks contain to sociologically analyze the construction of nation and development. So in situating the current crisis, how do we go about fieldwork? How do the social sciences go about fieldwork in the context? What I'm trying to do here, I'm trying to situate this crisis in the context of some of these debates. I'm doing this because I think it would be generative for students, teachers, researchers to engage with possibilities that emerge from these experimental traditions. Also question some of these possibilities because we are faced with newer challenges and explore newer methods of research. So I'll now quickly move to the second part of my presentation. And this is trying to draw reflections from some of the courses that at the undergrad level we've been offering in the Department of Sociology. So the students have to do courses on research methods. One of the courses that I've been doing at my department for the past 3 years now is a course that's called Ethnographic Filmmaking. Now, in this course, the students have to select a research topic. They have to then go and do their fieldwork at multiple sites that they think are going to respond to their field topic. They come back with field data. We analyze that data. We make a story out of that data, and then they go on to make films. And the students have been making brilliant short ethnographic films over these years. So last year, when I was running this course, March mid is when the lockdown happened. And by that time, the fieldwork was done. So the only thing that I had to manage in March and April was through telephonic conference calls and multiple sorts of online interactions to get the students now remotely to make the film, which we somehow did, which we were able to manage. And at that time, I thought that, this would not be a problem next year, because by next year, we would be going back to online classes. Like Professor Ramaswamy was just saying at the beginning of the session, when it started, none of us thought that the next semester and the next semester also we would probably be doing online. But now, as I'm talking and as I'm discussing this, I'm also thinking that this is November end, and this course and other methods course, they start in January. And I know that we are not going to physical classrooms in January. So how do I run a paper like this? How do all of us, think about social science research in context where now research also will have to be done remotely? So this is where I'd like to now bring in what I discussed in the first part to this, which is where I feel that it'd be very generative to introduce students to some of these disciplinary debates on experimental methods, fieldwork, and to also make them really think about how they can move from their topic in question to how are they conceptualizing a field and what could be the methods of study when their field is not going to be probably a physical location out there. So the way I'm thinking about it, some of the questions that I think it would be possible for students to research could be, for example, what are the discourses on the pandemic that have come about? What have been the narratives on migration that we all have seen coming about in the media? So how can the students do this research? In a discursive study, they would probably be remotely engaging with a lot of media communication, multiple sites through which regimes of representation are being created around the discourse, around, let's say, migrations, around health and medicine and bodies. I also think that this could be a generative time to introduce students to probably do something like a sociological study of home, where they are situated at this time. How can researchers study their own familial kin and their own familial spaces? Now, this is also could be a chance to introduce students to what is called as autoethnographies, which is where researchers may study their own communities or familial relations. And this becomes extremely difficult. It's got a range of ethical questions involved, but it becomes difficult because one has to make the familiar and the familial unfamiliar in this case. So how would an ethnography of a home shape up? How can students research their own locations in their own home dynamics? Would they want to focus on changing gender relations during the pandemic? Would they want to focus on questions of labor, housework? Would they want to focus on other dynamics around staying at home? Can this become an object of their research? Or for that matter, any other topic, but considering that we live highly mediated lives, how can we get the students to work with interviews that can make use of old and new media? These could be telephonic interviews. These could also be interviews via Skype. So I'll just conclude here. To conclude, I feel that we are faced with contingencies. I also believe that online classes cannot replace physical classes. I do dearly miss going to a classroom and see my students where I don't, and see them, in physical, see their faces, which is so rare in online classes, where sometimes because of networks, we'll having to keep our videos off. However, I also feel that this is a time that we as teachers must reflectively plan our modules so that this arrangement is made less alienating. We also must be very attentive to the digital divide that comes with online teaching. And at the same time, how can our modules be made more meaningful? So, as far as research and online fieldwork is concerned, I feel this contingency can give us an opportunity to engage afresh with some of the debates that have historically emerged in our discipline when also the world was changing in unprecedented ways. So, I suggest that this calls upon us to reimagine field, to not just think of it as a geographical location somewhere out there, to reimagine fieldwork and question some of the assumptions that we've had in thinking of field and fieldwork. So
Thank you
I'd
very
like to
much,
stop there.
Aarushie. That is actually very, very insightful. So many things that you said have struck so many chords. But one of the difficulties that I have faced personally is that my students rarely switch on the video when they're in class. I have a very small class because I teach an elective subject. And I mean, I've sort of begun to understand why, because their homes, I mean, when they're in a classroom, they are one person. And when they're at home, they're a very
Yes.
different person. And there is an interesting ethnography over here to explore, I imagine. But it's also one which is fraught with all these questions that we always have, about um, I don't know. I mean, all the sort of the sort of sociological questions that we have, and I think we do realize that the universities, as providing a space for students from all backgrounds to wipe clean that slate and just come in
Yes.
as scholars, so it wipes out all those inequalities and stuff. No, thank you very much. That was very insightful, because it's a discipline one doesn't usually associate with laboratory work.
Laboratory, yes.
Yeah. No, so let me now move to Aditya Vaishya from Ahmedabad University. Aditya, your vice chancellor was with us a few weeks ago, and he spoke to us about all the wonderful things that Ahmedabad University is doing in terms of delivering experiments over to the home. Because unlike sociology or anthropology, we cannot easily convert our homes into laboratories, unless, like young Sheldon, we were quite willing to convert it into a nuclear reactor or something like that. But those exceptions apart, we'd like to know what Ahmedabad University is doing as far as physics is concerned. Please.
Okay,
Or any
thanks
other
so much,
subject.
Professor Ram and Professor Madhurima. Sure, sure. Okay. So before I start, I mean, I'll start with few basic questions. And these questions are not confined to physics. These are about, in general, about any other laboratories, like whether it is chemistry or biology or physics, or in fact, in the engineering school as well. So usually, in the undergrads, we will see that each semester has something like 10 to 12 experiments, and the start of the semester, and the students are rushing to finish one experiment after another and so on. And by the end of the semester, they are like, here you go, I have done my sort of set of 10 or 12 experiment. And so this online sort of thing, or the pandemic, forced us to think, are all these experiments really necessary? Do we really need to complete this set of 10 to 12 experiments? What about the learnings from these experiments? I mean, whether the learning will be same if I cut down on one or two experiments, or whether the learning will be different. I mean, am I learning less if I'm not doing this experiment, or if I'm doing this experiment in some other way? Do I really need to have a simple pendulum? You know, if you take it, stretch it and leave it, and then it will swing on its from the central pivot point. Do we really need a very standard setup for that, or can I do some hands-on, using raw materials at home? Will it not yield the same result? Will the learning be different? Uh, then we talk about the errors and accuracies. What about error if I'm doing it, if I'm making an instrument by my hand, versus if I'm using it off the shelf, a branded one from a manufactured at a nice factory or laboratory. Okay, so these components, like what about the learning? If I replace it using a DIY sort of do it yourself, do it at home, hands-on thing. And talking about the errors and uncertainties which creep in if I am doing it with some raw materials, building an instrument from scratch. Also, one thing which usually we do in the physics labs, and in fact in most of the labs, is we always talk about core physics and mathematics embedded in that. We barely talk about applications. So this pandemic also gave us an opportunity to shift a little bit away from the core physics and talk about more on the application aspect as well. So I mean, in the after a few minutes, probably in the next section, when I talk about how I'm running or my colleagues are running the physics lab, I'll talk more about the application aspect actually. Then the fundamental thing, the baseline, or what I can say is the central point around this whole online lab, which myself and my colleagues thought about is, can we somehow make or force our physics students, and in general any student, to see day-to-day objects as potential tools, potential raw materials to use or utilize in their physics experiments. For example, if I can give an example of the lab which I was running in the previous semester, many of my students used half a kg soap bar, 250 gram soap bar, 100 gram soap bar, or rice bag as a standard weight. Of course, one can talk about, oh, well, there will be errors, there will be uncertainties. Yes, there will be, but we can quantify that. So some of them said, sir, we can utilize this later on in our hostel in cooking in the rice bags or something. Well, okay, fine, you can go ahead with that. So the way we adopted at least the mechanics experiment. Now I'm talking about just before the pandemic, how we were running the lab, and then I'll come to the pandemic scenario. So before the pandemic, we had a wonderful lab, the mechanics lab, where we call it a blank lab pedagogy. Enter the lab, when a student enters the lab, he's shocked because there's no instrument on the shelf, neither in the cupboards. It is just blank. There might be some tools and so, and we have a very wonderful workshop. So we give hands-on training to the students to go in the workshop to try their hands on the grinding tools, cutting tools, drilling machines, lasers, engravers, 3D printers, and all those things, and hand tools like simple cutting machines and all. And we allocate a budget for each experiment, and students have to discuss among themselves. They have to, find a way to construct the instrument in order to do the physics, in order to prove the physics, whether it is simple pendulum or whether it is conservation of angular momentum or something. And bang, there came the pandemic, and we were like, okay, our next lab is electricity and magnetism. What do we do about it? But we also had the mechanics lab online. So one of our faculty, he took care of the mechanics lab online. And the way we did, we had a combination of hands-on as well as online simulations. In some cases, we also use mobile applications. So if time permits, I will probably like to talk about that a little bit. Excuse me. So in we divided the class into groups of 2 or 3, depending on the strength of the class. So the way we start the lab is we give them videos. And these videos are not about the core physics. These videos are related to applications of the experiment they plan to do, or applications of the physics embedded in that application. So the applications may be in physics, maybe in biology, maybe in some other branch of science, or in general. So the students watched those videos, a set of 3 to 4 videos of 5 minutes each probably. And then they write a half a page summary on the video. And they also attempt an online multiple choice MCQ type of quiz. So based on the output of the written statement as well as the quiz, we judge how much they have grasped from the video. And depending on the experiments, either they get an online simulation or they get a hands-on. So for example, most of the mechanics experiments can be done using raw materials at home. You can construct a simple pendulum. You can do angular momentum conservation experiments at home. In fact, acceleration due to gravity, you can do have a very standard thing called the simple pendulum mechanism. Okay. Then some of our students made the Atwood machine at home. Some of them made lightened jars at home using aluminum foil and the batteries from the torch and the wires what they got at home and so on. So this was the application as well as hands-on. In some applications, we use a mobile application. So if I right now I'm using my phone. Sorry, I'm not sure if it is showing. I need to probably switch off something here. No problem. So right now in my phone, I have a app called Firefox. It uses all the sensors of the mobile. You have magnetometer sensor, you have light proximity sensor, you have barometer, you have temperature sensor. Some of the mobiles might have hygrometer and so on. So using these apps, some of my students conducted the magnetic field experiment. So what they did, they installed these apps on their mobile, and they moved around in their house, in their homes, and around different electrical appliances, finding out the magnetic fields around them. And they recorded that the magnetic from the instrument or from the machine, like a microwave oven or a mixer grinder or something like that. So some of the labs, some of the apps online apps are Java based, some are. I would like to emphasize on few other aspects of online labs specifically. We were discussing about the learnings from online versus offline. So there are of course pros and cons about both. In online lab, the wonderful thing is that the group coordination is excellent, whereas in the offline one, even if you make a group, there are always complaints. In the online one, they have to adjust to each other's timings. They divide the work in a very neat and clean way, and each one of them have their share of work. The discussions usually happen very rigorously, and most of the time, if it is happening on Zoom, we partition them into what you call Zoom rooms or something, breakout rooms. And the faculty and the TA, we jump from one breakout room to another, and take active part in the discussions along with the students. Then one aspect of online teaching is embedded in the system, so you get a very neat and clean result. That is one of the most prominent drawback if we talk about online simulations. But most of the time, we try to couple online simulation along with hands-on. So if you some of the online tools which I'm using here, so there is something called the circuit labs here. Here you can use and draw wires, and so it is all about electronics. So it's a freeware, you can use it for all sort of electronic experiments and so on. You can draw so many features here. Another one is the mobile application I was talking about is Firefox. This is one of the most wonderful applications one can have on mobile. And the other one is from Walter Friend. Again, it has a lot of online simulations, mostly from mechanics, oscillations. But among them, the best one is FET. It is by University of Colorado, and in fact, it was developed online which one can use, particularly go for a formula sound.
Aditya,
Oh, sorry. So let
the...
me switch off my video actually.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, and also,
Yes, sorry, Professor Ram.
no, it's okay. No, it's just that, you're giving us very valuable inputs at this point, and we're not able to hear you well, Aditya. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I think audible now. Am I audible now? Is it?
Yes, you are audible now. Can you please go on?
Okay, sure. Thanks very much. Okay, so some of my other faculties in the biology and so on. I think in previous discussion forum, Professor Raghuram Rajan talked about our flagship program, the foundation program. In foundation program, in a couple of studios, many of our faculties they used hands-on approach. So in one was about finding out the pH of different solutions as well as osmosis. So for osmosis, they use this baby diapers, the material which is there in the baby diaper as well as sanitary napkins. And so you soak it in the water or so, and then if you put salt, it will leach out water. So there's an elaborate procedure on that. Similarly, pH of the liquids, they tried out using orange juice as well as baking soda. So one is alkaline and one is acidic. And then you use turmeric from orange to purple and so on. In one of the experiments, one of the faculties, they asked students to grow bacteria and fungi at home. And using E. coli, which is, readily available in the market and
Not in the market,
so
Aditya. It's
on.
available
And the
everywhere.
food was soya protein and yeah. so these very, very basic foundational experiments they were able to do at home. Yeah. So I will probably stop here, except just one more point I would like to add here is that this pandemic has given us an opportunity to connect our curriculum to the real world around us. So it is not necessary for us to stick to those standard experiments which we always do in the labs. Can we connect somehow our labs to our real world? Can we see our day-to-day objects as tools, potential raw materials, which we can bring in our labs? I mean, in our experiments and learn from them more in the discussion. Thanks very much.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Aditya. And I'm sorry so much of the information that you've given is very practical and valuable for us. I'm going to have to request you to please summarize it and send it to Madhurima. We'll put it on our Google Groups pages. We'll put it on our Slack discussion group. No, because, the fact that you have solved certain types of problems, it needs to reach a wider audience than you are able to right now. Okay. And this is one way of just telling people that these are the things that you have done and that they could also do. All right.
Sure, I will document
We'll
it
come
and
back
send it.
to
Thanks so
we'll
much.
come back to things more in questions and so on. Let's just now move to the next speaker. I'm sorry we're running a little late, but Venkatesh, would you please? You need to share your screen, right?
Sure.
Right. So, would you please just go ahead, Venkatesh from IIIT Hyderabad? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Madhurima and Professor Ramaswamy, for inviting me. I'm extremely delighted to join this panel, and I found the discussion so far extremely valuable. There are just so many facets to this problem that we are all facing together. So I jotted down a bunch of points before the meeting, and I'd like to quickly run through them. They're sort of in two parts. The first part is sort of overall ideas, and the second part is more specific details, which I'll be happy to sort of email them to Madhurima, and I know it could be shared with specific URLs and things like that. But I think we're looking at a very unique situation. None of us, in fact, even 1 year ago, were even thinking of this. But at the same time, the positive side of this is a great opportunity for us. It sort of has shaken us, all of us, from our comfort zones And it has sort of forced us to innovate in big and in small and big ways. I mean, every one of us, and including our students, by the way, have been innovating, trying to juggle various things, trying to find, as you were saying, jugaad, trying to find solutions to very practical problems, but also sort of step back and sort of think about the larger problem, which is, how is it that if I'm sort of boxed into this simulation world and this virtual world, what does it actually do to my entire subject? What is it actually? Is there something like virtual physics? Is there, how do I virtualize everything? In fact, my background is computer science, and this problem of virtualizing is the problem in computer science, right? You virtualize data, you virtualize machines, you virtualize all kinds of things. And at the end of it, you're trying to see how you can present something, right? By, in some sense, trying to virtualize everything around you. Okay. And that is, I see, the biggest challenge in front of us. Now, every domain will have to sort of invent and innovate in their own way here. But of course, there are some observations that I think span across disciplines, and those is what I would like to sort of get in touch with in the next few minutes. Okay, so I have last semester and the semester before, between these 2 semesters that I passed, I've taught 3 courses. All 3 were elective courses. I did not have a large class of I don't know, like hundreds of students. I had smaller classes, relatively speaking. My largest class was about 32 students, which I'm teaching this semester. Of course, in computer science, it's sort of virtualization is already present. In some sense, everything that we do is virtual, but that doesn't mean that we did not face challenges. To start with, so let me quickly dwell on the challenges that I had. I don't have these courses that I've taught do not have a lab component, but there are lots of heavy programming assignments, which for a computer science student pretty much constitute a lab. And of course, luckily for us, the students have been doing computer science programming assignments, and there are very good online environments for doing them. So we did not have a problem. I think what has sort of improved, and this is sort of the silver lining, if you will, is because the students are no longer in the hostel, talking in the corridors in their rooms about the problems, they have had to become a lot more organized. And one of the sort of manifestations of this, if you will, is they are all trying very hard to improve their articulation, and especially by writing things. So if I give them an experiment to do, if I give them a programming assignment to do, I have forced them to not just submit the code, but also a report. Okay, there's a very nice movement in programming called literate programming. Okay, it was started by Donald Knuth many decades ago. But basically, what that means is you describe it's like a scientific report. Anything you do, any artifact you present, is couched in a scientific report. So also as a program. Okay, and the advantage now that I'm seeing of this, because I had to insist that my students do it this way, was that students are able to, at least trying harder to explain why something works. Often in an experiment, the assumptions are very important, and often students miss out those assumptions. They just don't state them. Okay, so this is getting them to sort of write everything down. I have explicitly given them marks for the quality of the documentation. So this is a very important point. The students are also realizing that they have to articulate better, because the media they have, the medium they have is now limited. There's no physical medium. They can't just sit across the table. One way I would articulate very informally, but now, sort of things have changed a little bit. Okay, so that's sort of one thing that all of us will need to get conscious is what are the practical sort of offshoot of this is, what are the documentation tools? I mean, how will you do them? For example, there's something called, some of you might have used in the sciences, something called the Python scientific notebook, okay, which is really like a lab notebook, but it's very nice. It's online. You can put code, figures, all kinds of things inside that. Okay, so that's sort of an important thing that has come out of this whole COVID thing. The other thing, and let me take a few more minutes to talk about what is really, there are several challenges, as I said, but I think one very important and deep challenge that I see for myself and also for my colleagues, at least in my discipline, perhaps if I dare say in other disciplines as well, is the pedagogy that we have built for our own disciplines, okay, has suddenly been sort of shaken, right? And the shake is in two ways, because as you know, at least in computer science, the way I look at it is, you know, the pedagogy has always been about write a program for this and just make it work, right? But often in experimental, the pedagogy for experiment is the fundamental thing there is interaction. You do something, you observe something. You do something else, you observe something else. So this paradigm of interaction, okay, and now on top of that, virtualization. So you're now interacting virtually. You're not actually doing something to a physical beaker. You're not heating it physically, but you're still interacting, and you have to make this interaction virtual. Okay, this is the biggest challenge. And this actually brings us down to the fundamental question. I mean, somewhere I said, I saw the title, it said, can virtual labs replace real labs? I think that's sort of the wrong question to ask. The question to ask is, what is it that extra that virtual labs can bring you? Okay. Of course, the virtual lab is not going to recreate the real environment. Okay. I mean, your hands are not going to start burning if you put your, you know, you did something wrong in the lab. But does it bring something? What does it actually bring to the table? That has to do fundamentally with the pedagogy of the discipline. Okay. And that is, I think, for some of us, a very, very interesting question. In fact, I was very pleased to see how it was affecting sociology by Professor Aarushie, who was talking about this. And I think this is an opportunity for all of us to ponder about that and come up with solutions. In my own case, in computer science, I've been relooking at the pedagogy of algorithms and seeing what is the experimental equivalent of doing an algorithm, which is in fact a completely automated thing. An algorithm is completely automated. Okay. If I really want to teach algorithms, I want to have a laboratory for algorithms, I want a student to interact and discover for herself what is the strategy behind this algorithm and why does it work. Okay. I'm sure every discipline has these properties and these questions that it can formulate in its own way. And I think really we are looking at a great opportunity for innovation. I mean, this is really the Manhattan Project of our times. I mean, this is where we really need to get together and put something out there. Okay, so let me now quickly get to a couple of other quick points that I think is the real challenge. Of course, there is the digital divide, and unfortunately, the digital divide is playing out in front of us right now. And that's a big challenge. And that is a real challenge. It is really affecting people. How can we solve, how can we innovate to solve and address specific issues about this digital divide? I can give you a couple of examples. I know that many places students are having difficulty using laptops. They can't afford to buy a laptop, but even if you can afford to buy it, they're not available right now. Okay. So where is the research in quickly developing extremely low-cost devices? Okay. Now, most of these students do have a mobile phone, and how can we adapt? You know, we were just hearing examples about physics experiments on mobiles. So that is where I think quick innovation is absolutely necessary to bring down the bar for education. I mean, I shouldn't have to have an expensive piece of equipment just to take a class. So there is that concern. And I think there's also another important thing that has to do with, again, with the pedagogy of this. I mean, I think you have to really get down to what is the essence of an experiment. For example, a lot of insight can be sort of garnered or gained by simulations and empirical data collection and analysis of data. A lot of experimentation actually involves data. And how do these students work with data completely virtually? Can we create virtual data sets where they can actually perform quote unquote an experiment, but the data set is virtual? It just maybe comes from somewhere else. So there are two parts. There's actual collection of the data, cleaning up the data, and then actually analyzing the data and then making inferences. So there are all these different steps that are involved. And these are some of the issues. I have a list of other tools and tips and websites and so on, which I'll be happy to post later on.
Yes.
But I think that can be done later on.
Yes.
Thank you. Hello.
You have to unmute yourself, Professor Ram.
Yeah.
Okay, no, thank you, Venkatesh. I was struck really by the similarity of what Aarushie was saying and what many of the things you were saying. So sociology is not really different from computer science. In some basic way. So no. I think that the issues that we face as teachers of having to redefine our subject, I think the articulation of that was very nice, except that while as teachers we may choose to redefine our subject, the UGC and its requirements for what you have to do in order to get a degree, that doesn't change nearly as fast as, and it doesn't change with as much introspection as we are willing to bring to a particular subject. So of course there is one abstract at the meta level, we are bothered about our subject, but then we also have this issue of giving our students a degree to help them to because they need to also get out with a degree, and
Right.
how are we going to do that?
Sure.
Okay, so as you would have noticed in our panel discussion, we do try to cover both a range of topics, not both, three things. We try to cover a range of topics, a range of types of institutions, and of course, the country as a whole, something which is representative of the country. So now we're moving down to Kerala and to the field of geology, which is also a very field-based work subject. So let me now request Professor Chandan Kumar of the Central University of Kerala and the Department of Geology to tell us about how he and his students are facing lab work at this time. And then,
very good afternoon to all. Am I audible?
yes, very audible. You're not.
Please excuse me for not being online in the video mode. I'm experiencing some internet connection issues since morning. I had to be online for some other meeting also. I had a lot of issues there, so I just try to keep my audio on. First of all, I would like to begin with taking this opportunity to thank Professor Madhurima and the organizers, Professor Ram, for providing me this opportunity to share my experience of teaching field and lab-based geology papers. So, alrighty then. I would like to give some insights into what basically geology is, and what are the courses I'm engaging, and what are the difficulties that I've faced, and how I try to overcome that. Okay, so ours is a very new department in the Central University of Kerala. We started 4 years back in 2016, and we are only 4 faculty members, and we have limited student strength. As of now, we have 20 plus students out of 40 sanctioned strength, and we basically train students. We teach geology as primarily as a field subject and a laboratory subject. As most of you might know, geology is primarily a field and laboratory oriented observational science. A part of the learning module in geology involves study of rocks. So there are many aspects to geology, but I am just concentrating on only those aspects which we found very difficult during this pandemic time to teach. So I just concentrate on only those modules. One of such module which I teach to the students, post-graduation students, is study of rocks, basically the rock composition, physical structure, especially in its natural environment, that is field. So field is an essential component of my course curriculum. So when I say rocks here, I'm talking about 2 different aspects. The first one is those rocks which carry no commercial value and are studied purely for satisfying the scientific curiosity about the Earth's origin and the dynamic processes associated with it. And the second part is more interesting, where we train students to identify the minerals within the rock that carry commercial value, which ultimately leads to the mining of these deposits, rock deposits or mineral deposits in a general way. I teach 2 courses at the Central University of Kerala that involves these 2 aspects. One is the petrology, purely study of rocks, and another one is economic geology, which involves the exploration of commercial mineral deposits. So the second paper is most crucial, that is economic geology, considering the professional aspirations of students who get enrolled in geology. So I've designed these two courses in such a way that they open up students to the four different aspects. There is theoretical approach, field-based studies, practical exercises, and industrial visits. So if you see this, only the 25% of the course module contains classroom teaching, and 75% of the time, the students, 75% of the course module contains engaging students in field studies, in laboratory studies, and in industrial visits where they get hands-on experience of various exploration techniques. But for the past 6 to 8 months, teaching my course had become really challenging, especially when the pandemic started in the month of March. So we were almost at the end of closing the semester. So we did not face much challenges. But right now, as of now, by November, this date, we have already completed one semester, and we are about to enter the next semester, that is even semester from December 1st. So this past semester, odd semester, was very challenging for us, especially to conduct practical courses. The challenges were twofold. The first was from the faculty's end, that is from my end, where I was supposed to create a virtual laboratory and virtual field for the students to get the real field or laboratory experience, simulated experience. And the second one was not under my control. It was at the students' end, where most of the students were, especially engaged and enrolled in our department, or from rural background from Kerala, and they have very poor network connectivity issues, which is totally out of our hands. And this had made them difficult to come online for the virtual classroom experience. And it is not only the practical aspect, even for regular theory classes where the recorded videos were uploaded for them to visualize later sometime, they had difficulty in that too. They had to come like 10 to 15 kilometers away from their house where they could get the actual network coverage in order to attend those classes, view those classes. So this was the background we had, and in this background, I had to conduct practical and field classes. That was the task assigned by our university administration. So my laboratory sessions usually includes studying the rocks under the microscope to investigate their mineral composition, microstructures, textural characteristics, and finally making a report on the mineral paragenesis, that is the order of mineral genesis, origin. For this exercise, students need to sit in front of the microscope. That is a fundamental thing, and it is very difficult to provide a microscope to each and every student, where we are finding it difficult to give them like a proper tablet or a cell phone for them to access online classes. So, and secondly, when it comes to field aspects, the work includes identifying the primary and secondary structures in the rock outcrops and identifying different minerals present in the rocks in the field in order to geologically map the study area and explore the potentiality of the study area for the commercial mineral deposits, which could lead in an economic activity like mining. Apart from this, the laboratory and field sessions also includes statistical and mathematical calculations from the predefined or already existing data sets, which we did not find it too difficult to carry out in the online mode. But the first two things, where the microscope is involved and some instruments are involved, and the second thing where they are supposed to be in the field in person in front of the outcrops and making the judgments or observations on their own. So that was the difficult task. So what I did was, what I came up with was to run this virtual lab and field sessions, I had to do a lot of homework. So I had to talk to many professors at some universities like University of Leeds, Camborne School of Mines, University of South Florida, Australian National University. Because why these universities? Because these now universities were already were giving virtual geoscience classroom experience for the students prior to the this pandemic period, and that got it became. It gave lots of ideas, and finally I started creating my own virtual laboratory sessions after discussing with these people and seeing their techniques or methodology. I sat in front of the microscope taking photos of thin sections, converted them to animated GIFs, and started using them on a trial mode on select students initially before the semester started to see whether the students are capable of using this. The best part of creating this kind of virtual microscope experience through GIF mode was it was very easy to handle for me as well as for the students, because they can be shared very easily on online platforms. Like you don't need internet connectivity for that. Even the GIFs can be sent through normal SMS, or you can use WhatsApp or even email. So these GIFs, when you start playing, they give an impression of as if you are looking under the microscope virtually. How I would like to visualize the section if I am visualizing the sections under the microscope. So with these things, the students were able to look into these different aspects of minerals present in the given section and make the report out of that. And it was to some extent they really enjoyed. And similarly, when it comes to the field-based experience, that was very challenging because I had to give a simulated experience of actual field on their screen. So designing that was quite challenging. So I came up with a particular activity known as exploration game. So this is like this exploration game gives a simulated experience of investigating or discovering a commercial mineral deposit. Like I think most of you people must have played Treasure Hunt when they were young kids. It is as good as that, but it is kind of advanced mode for geological studies. This is particularly because most of the students seek job opportunities in exploration and mining sectors once they complete their course, and geological exploration skill comes in handy for them to fetch a job very easily. So the idea behind, the principle behind engaging students in this method of learning is to give them a hypothetical map. Means we will give them an hypothetical map where we will have identified 5 to 6 sites, that is locations, which gives the hints of presence or absence of mineralization. Say, for example, presence of geophysical anomalies or mineral alteration zones, presence of indicated minerals, or presence of national and or state boundaries, rock terrains, etc. So this gives students an opportunity not only to understand the theory behind the mineral exploration, but also teaches them how one can decide what is commercial and what is not commercial when it comes to reality. For example, a high potential mineral deposit present in the troubled international boundaries is not economical for any private firm to invest in exploration and mining activities. While doing this game or playing this game or doing this activity, a teacher can also make it exciting by asking students to invest some imaginary investment like money in the most preferred site out of 4 or 5 sites as per their judgment. And in the end, if they have made right judgment, they would get some kind of imaginary profit, which definitely motivates them to play this again and again. So also I try to, I just 2 minutes, I'll just wind it up, I'm at the end. So also I try to use online teaching materials. I tried using online teaching materials, which were more suitable for virtual teaching offered by various geoscience institutes. Some examples I would like to quote, that is CRC Carleton University, you have Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Geological Society of America offers a wide range of virtual platforms where they simulate the field experiences. We have National Association of Geoscience Teachers and our own government of India's website, web portals like Swayam e-Pathshalas also offer some range of e-resources for teaching virtual labs and field geology courses. Finally, I would like to say each teacher knows their course structure and content better than anyone else, and also each teacher is unique when it comes to engaging students in the learning process. It's up to them to come up with some innovative ideas in how they want to convey the learning content to the students. As the previous speaker, Dr. Aditya, was mentioning, it's always good to bring in the real world into the laboratories rather than taking the laboratories into the real world. So you can make use of all the things available around you to create a laboratory experience wherever you are sitting at. Thank you for the opportunity. I wish all the very best.
Thank you very much, Chandan. I like your idea of using GIFs and using that to communicate, various concepts and almost bring the laboratory to your students. I mean, it is possible in geology, and I think, as you also noted, we are, as a community, we are really committed to our students. So we do try whatever we can to get the experience over to them. Right. Thanks for also, this is the first time we've had a geologist on our panel discussion. So
thank you very much, sir, for having me. I'm very much excited.
You see, you're being from geology, you're being an experimentalist, and you're being from Kerala. All of them are important, to our understanding and appreciating the complexity of online teaching in India.
Yes,
Our next speaker is Professor Shahin Sultana from Pondicherry University. Professor Sultana is a professor of social work. And I'd like to hear from her as to the challenges that her students are facing in having practical experience at this time. Professor Sultana.
Thank you, Professor Ramaswamy, sir, and also Professor Madhurima. In fact, when Professor Madhurima called me, I was very happy that all of us as teachers, we are taking up a lot of initiatives individually. But then through this collective initiative, we will be able to share our ideas and thoughts and make, the teaching learning as feasible as possible in this pandemic crisis. This pandemic, as all of us have experienced, it happened somewhere in the middle of March, when it happens to be a very peak season for students, because the semester is almost coming towards the end. There was total, struck of awe, and there was total silence in the entire week when this happened as to what we would be doing next. The confusion was there for the teachers as well as for the students. And suddenly, suddenly a group of students said, okay, in the meantime, when you are discussing about how we are going to go ahead with the pedagogy and all that, why don't we now start with the virtual farewell? This silence, started into a kind of thought, and we were all so excited. What is this? What is this virtual farewell? And they said, okay, let the universities decide. We know that we are going to have somehow, complete this course with all your support and the university support and UGC, of course, and all the academic bodies. And then when we saw how the students, mobilized and coordinated this virtual farewell, it gave us a lot of positive hope. Okay, something is better than nothing. We can at least initiate this. And that's how, I myself as a teacher really got a lot of enthusiasm and a positive spirit from these students. So I think when we as teachers, we've experienced this, stride together, students have also been a motivating factor for us in inspiring and instilling the confidence. Yes, it's possible amidst this COVID crisis. To share with this audience, I teach psychology for social work practice. I teach social policy and welfare administration. And my other two papers are medical social work and public health. So this pandemic crisis just gave me this feeling that it's a huge opportunity for the trainee social workers who are graduating, because there's so much of scope, when it comes to job placements. And but on the other side, only if they complete, they can enter into the job market. So that was a confusion over, there is a lot of opportunities which is awaiting for your help. But then on the other side, you have to complete your degree. So this confusion was moving on. At the same time, I would also like to share with you all that besides a professor in social work, I take care of the dean students' welfare, which is again a difficult assignment, which of handling grievances with the students at the university level. So March and April season happens to be a season of grievances where students are graduating, they're moving outside, about their degrees, about their location, about vacating from the hostels and all that. Everything was moved into a total silence. And then, we realized that we cannot be just keeping it like this. We'll have to move, and slowly momentum picked up. And that's where, we also started initiating measures as to how to address these grievances. And we realized that we can't do it with one particular zone. We divided into 3 categories of grievances cell, and then we started addressing, the needs of these students through these committees. And then we realized the kind of experiences the students are moving. Now they've left their certificates here. They have to apply for their higher competitive exams. They just had to leave the campus as it is, because no one was sure about what the next step was. So we understood the grievances of the students were not only with the academic kind, but also with the non-academic kind, about their future, about their well-being, about their welfare, about their family members, about their movement, about their mobility. All this gave us a good experience to understand and how to, accommodate these needs into our future courses of to come. So that was one aspect where I wanted to share about the welfare aspect with respect to students. On the other side, if you take social work as a professional course, I was very happy when Dr. Aarushie also spoke that, our entire course structure is something more on the field work based and not on theory. So if you see our curriculum, our course, 5-week teaching pattern, we have Monday, Tuesday, and Friday as the theory days, and Wednesday and Thursday, the students go onto the field. Now, how are we going to make this balance? This balance has to be struck so that the student don't feel that, they're sitting in the classes from Monday to Friday and they're not able to go to the field because now they're not in the university pattern. In the first year, we have something which is known as the observation visits. Now, observation visits is basically the students come into our course from varied disciplines. Might be he or she comes from economics, from banking management, from physics, from chemistry, from any other stream. So the first semester, we give ample importance for the students to get oriented to the visits. Probably it's an elderly setting, it is a community setting, it is a hospital setting, it is a human rights setting, it's an agency setting, it can be a disability setting. Now, the challenge before us was how are we going to experience the students into such settings without, taking them in person. So that was the biggest challenge. And then we started, working out modalities. Can we have what is known as the virtual orientation program? And I'm very happy to share with this learned audience that we have successfully completed this time virtual orientation program minus the observation visits, which could have happened in person and could have given more experience. But of course, we would compensate that in the coming semesters, but we could at least give them the scope that, the orientation program was feasible and they started to learn what different kind of settings were there, whether it was the hospital, whether it was the industry setting, whether it was the community setting. Now, the next most important challenge is the rural camp. We have what is known as 10 days rural camp scheduled in our semester, where we take our students and we go to the tribal hamlets or we go to the remotest parts of any nook and corner of the country. Now, I remember taking them for such camp like Pondicherry, where even mobile phones and all these connectivities are not, and the student is totally disconnected with the external world for almost close to 10 days. How are we going to give this practical experience to the students was the biggest challenge. Now we are all working out as a team. We are planning that if possible, we would give them a virtual experience of what is happening in the communities, or if possible, we would shift that, to the next semester, part and part, 50% now and 50% later, as to how they can have the live experiences of these things in the rural villages. Now, we as Central University, just exactly like CUTN and all other universities, have students from various parts of the country. And, when we take them to these, it's not only that they learn about what is fieldwork, but their language, the culture, the mannerism, the group behavior, the way the people live there, what are their resources. Like many people have never seen a seashore. When they come to Pondicherry for the first time, just having a seashore opposite to the university itself incites, gives them a lot of enthusiasm. Even a rural camp across the seashore gives them so much of learning. So all these experiences were being missed, and they've all been admitted into the course with this hope and with this enthusiasm. Next one, most important point, of course, I understand there's time restrictions, but just two more points which I wanted to share is, one which is known as the concurrent fieldwork placement, which I said that Wednesday and Thursday, the students go to the respective fieldwork settings. Like if they learn how to practice psychiatry, they have to go to a psychiatric setting in the hospital, might be a government hospital or a private hospital, and they actually meet the clients who are experiencing depression or stress or phobia or anxiety. Now, how are we going to materialize this experience? So we had a lot of discussion with the fieldwork settings. Some of the fieldwork settings actually came forward. They said, yes, we can try to, sensitize them and orient them through tutorials, through skill labs, and also on live sessions, where we can organize such webinars so that they will not feel that when they come back, God forbid they come back, surely they should come back the next semester if things are better. they don't feel that they are alienated from the field, but they are able to practice some of the methods, which they have already heard through live sessions, through skill labs, and through tutorials. We had a major challenge as far as dissertation is concerned. So as rightly pointed out by many of the learned teachers here, a WhatsApp group has been initiated, and we had to discuss most of the research themes and topics through these WhatsApp groups, and weekly online Google meetings have been facilitated where we bring them, we ask them, going to the field would be a practical difficulty as of now, but how else, with their support and enthusiasm, we can materialize even the dissertation. So the talks are going on. So I like Aarushie ma'am and all the other teachers who are just sharing their experiences here. Social work being an 80 to 90% fieldwork based course has its own set of challenges. We are trying to do our best, but of course, virtual learning and online learning cannot replace the in-class learning, and we hope that things will be better. But we are trying our best to bring the field to the homes, but practically it is not possible. 50% can be done, but we are evaluating after every one step which we have initiated. So just like I said that we had the virtual farewell, which was an initiation which cannot, of course, equalize to the in-presence farewell, but at least they should not go away with the feeling that they never had a farewell. Something is better than nothing. So we are trying our best, to address to the grievances of the students, to give them field level realities to their homes, whether it is, the clients who are suffering from stress, anxiety, or whatever it is, and even fields like disability and the elderly home. You can just think, for example, going for a visit to an elderly home, even at this age, gives you a lot of goosebumps to make you understand whether you would like to be part and parcel of that home at that age. Now, these lived-in experiences are very important for the trainee social workers so that they identify the areas and they go and work in the future. But that is not becoming possible. We are trying our best. Hopefully, that in the coming days, we will try to do much better than we started with. So I take this opportunity to thank all of them for giving me this opportunity. I know 5 minutes to 7 minutes is the least, but then I've tried to rush up so that, you will have concluding time. I'm really happy to the entire team for having initiated this initiative. My support and wishes for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Sultana. Okay, now, as you also noted, we need to have a little time for discussion. People have a lot to share, it's clear. And thank you very much again, all of you, for sharing so generously about what you all have been doing, your experiences, your insight, and particularly the resources, website resources and other such stuff. I know that Venkatesh has already given us many websites and links. All these will be put up on our Slack group. They'll be put up on our Google pages and so on and so forth. I know that there are a bunch of questions which are up there on YouTube and on our Zoom chat. Madhu, would you like to just take
yeah.
over?
What I'll do is to actually summarize these questions into two. One related to sciences and the other to social sciences, so to say, for the paucity of time. And there have been a lot of requests for sharing of resources specifically to chemistry, zoology, botany, and at school level. So if you have any links or resources, please do share with us and we'll put it on the Slack channel. There are many teachers who are looking for some support and where they can find some virtual labs. So please write in. Anybody who has some links or something, please let us know. That being said, let me ask the first question, which is about sciences. See, all of us agree that the need of the hour is to have low cost equipment or go virtual. Because my colleague Venkatesh, who's here, we know when we started CUTN, we had a lot of these automated equipment in the laboratories. We went into the market and picked up ball bearings and screws and said, like, you need the students to get that experience and not automate everything. The reverse is what is happening now. On one hand, there is the low cost equipment, and on the other hand, it's a virtual experience. So my question is twofold. What exactly is the loss when you have a virtual lab in place of a real lab? That's question one. And question two is, it's a more of a concern. Somebody, who had to deal with the budgeting for a department. Already, the number of credits that we assign to experimental courses is pretty small. And now, if we say that we can do these online, and there was a mention about the number of experiments. Do we need 10 to 12? I mean, I understand as a teacher, I know what that question means, but I'm asking, will this lead to a case where we further reduce the number of experimental courses, and eventually all of science becomes, some kind of a theoretical course? So, two parts to that.
Well, why don't we start with, maybe Chandan, would you like to address some of these issues? And then Venkatesh, and perhaps then we can have Ashish.
Hello. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm very sorry. I was just typing in the web addresses for different resources. I just missed your question. Could you please?
Okay, Madhu, you send him the question on the chat, and maybe Venkatesh was listening more carefully. Would you like to just respond to that?
Yeah, I can take a shot at this. So I think the question really is, what is it that you lose when you get onto the virtual lab? This is obviously the question on everyone's mind. And in fact, is also the source of a lot of apprehension about virtual labs. See, what we miss out is rather obvious, and we could just state what we're missing out. I think experimentation, when one does experimentation, there are tangible things that one has to touch, feel, change, move, and so on. And those are practically impossible to simulate unless they are very, very good, high quality experiments. And the second thing, of course, that you miss out is the element of surprise that one has when one does an experiment, and more often than not, it doesn't work out, or some new thing happens, or something spills, or something breaks, or etc., etc., etc. Now, of course, it's a huge part of learning, and it's hard to sort of simulate that as it is. Okay, so there are some obvious difficulties, let us put it this way, to put it mildly, when you try to virtualize an experiment. Okay, there are many others. There is a lot of group learning that happens. It's rare that you do an experiment alone. You typically have lab mates who are doing the experiment with you. There's a lot of discussion. Often these labs are also real time. I mean, we're doing a chemistry experiment. It is a real time thing. You have to do this, heat it for exactly so many minutes, and not less, not more. So there's a lot of things that actually happen, which require a strong presence of mind and to quickly adapt and recover in case there is a mistake. Now, one of the things that's been touted about virtual labs is, look, it's okay to make mistakes. Okay, and then you can redo the experiment and keep doing this over and over again, change the data, and so on. The ideal virtual lab experiment will, of course, have all of those things, but what is missing out is rather obvious. Having said that, there are some interesting things one can do with virtual labs that are perhaps not possible in the physical space, because virtual labs involve creating virtual worlds. You're living in a virtual world. You can suddenly change the acceleration due to gravity. Okay, and say, well, now suppose this pendulum was swinging on the moon, what would happen? Right? You don't have to go to the moon for that, and you can't recreate a different G on Earth. So, well, but you can do it in the virtual world. So there are certain interesting opportunities there. No, so I'll stop there. I mean, there are many other things, but
of course there are other things, Venkatesh. On an earlier one of these panels, we've also talked about the difficulty there. You see, in our subjects, we are only teaching concepts, and okay, you make a mistake, it doesn't matter. What about medicine?
Exactly.
Yes.
When you have medical training, which and it's a seeing stuff in a laboratory in the on the operation table. I mean, all these are so important, and so different types. The reason I bring it up, of course, one doesn't have to go to the example of medicine, where each one of us is instinctively worried. Will my doctor in the future be trained, and will he have passed out, or will she have passed out in 21 or 20 or whichever year? teaching them for a degree is only one part of it. They are going to also be competitive in a world where skills are going to be essential. All right, it's one thing to say pendulums and moving around and what have you, but see, many of our master's students are looking for PhD placements. How do you substitute that PhD experience, or are we going to have just generations of people going to do theory? We cannot afford that also. We need to have experimental physicists coming up. So there's going to be some part of all this that we have to address, that, or chemistry. With all the best intentions in the world, you cannot replicate the smell of a good chemistry lab, which is so much an essential part of doing the subject. uh, you know, and having learned to cook from YouTube, I can assure you that my chemical experiments at home are not as good as they should be. So, you cannot do some subjects as easily. And you cannot theoretize every subject also. So, I mean, then there are other issues, but let me have Aditya's reaction, Aditya, because you are now educating undergraduates, right?
Yes, Professor Ram. And so I will continue on from where Professor Venkat, what he talked about the experiences that touch the feel and so on, and also about what you're saying about the senior level labs like the postgrads and all. Indeed, it is really very challenging to think about how we can substitute those experiences which the students will gain in the postgrad labs, like at the MSc level. And in fact, I think Professor Mandel was asking the same question in the chat box, like how do we do? Many of our faculties, especially in the engineering school, what they are doing is, now again, I won't say that that is the best practice, but I think that is the best we can probably do in the current scenario, is that they're recording the labs, the experiments, and they are making available the videos and the raw data they are sending to the students. So what the students do is they watch the video, how the faculty has conducted, and then they take the raw data and then they do the subsequent analysis. I mean, this is an easy way out sort of thing. In yet another mode, what they are doing is some of the teaching assistants are actually present in the lab during the experimental session, and the students dictate what they have to do. So, I mean, if you don't know how to conduct a lab, how to conduct an experiment, definitely your steps are going to be wrong, and the end result will not be. So these are some ways out, but again, I think we all have to brainstorm to find out the solutions for what you are saying for the senior level. For undergrads, like first and second year undergrads, it might be relatively easy. One question I think which Professor Madhurima in fact pointed out, and which I was talking about earlier, about the number of experiments, and are we really going to squeeze the labs further which are already like have very less credits? I think it is not exactly about the number of experiments. I feel it is more about the learnings from those experiments, and without compromising on the learnings. Like I was talking about, one of my colleague, he's taking a mechanics lab online. Now the students are doing acceleration due to gravity, for example. They are finding out from 3 or 4 different ways. Okay, the same parameter in different ways. You swing a pendulum, you make an foot machine, you drop a ball, you roll a ball, rolling kinetics. So many other things are there, and not just, I mean, not just simple pendulum. There are many more things, many more experiments, and how to look at the same problem from different angles, from different point of views. So the learnings embedded in that versus learning, you have in 6, 7, or 8 or 10 experiments. So typically in our labs, they do 6 or 7 experiments in one session, in one semester. But all of them, they make instruments hands-on, I mean, from scratch. No standard instrument is available. They make them from raw materials. So the learning in, pressing some button versus doing something from scratch. So I think the debate is probably more on that.
Okay. Chandan, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was very I'm very sorry. There are two questions Professor Madhurima asked. That is, what is the loss when we get onto a virtual lab, and will the shift to VLabs eventually lead to reduced courses, grades, and budget allotted to labs? So I'll probably answer the second question, and then move on to the first question. I'm currently I'm in the part of administration as assistant registrar, and I'm serving that. And I know definitely if there is a shift from virtual labs, shift to the virtual labs, definitely there is going to be a reduced budget allocation to different laboratories. That is different thing in central universities. The second thing is, what is the loss when we get onto a virtual lab? The major thing in geological laboratories or in geological field visit is the time constraint. So you have to do your field works within a given time frame. Otherwise, you are incurring lots and lots of loss in terms of money. That's the first thing. And the second thing is all these virtual laboratories perhaps is suitable for teaching alone. But when it comes to research, we definitely have to do the field work. We definitely have to collect the data or samples in person. There is no alternative for that. And the third thing is virtual field experience can give you a lot of ideas. There is definitely a plus positive side to that, because some of the geographical entities or geological entities which are not available in, say, for example, in India, which is available in US, that can be brought into the laboratories, in our laboratories, and which can be made accessible to our own students. So that is the plus side. But the negative side of that is a student never experiences the exhaustive work which is involved in the field. Once the student gets graduated and joins a particular company or particular organization as a geologist, he has to do lots and lots of field work, which involves stressing out. The whole day's field work stresses out a person like anything when you conduct geological field work. But that experience cannot be simulated in the laboratories. So that is one of the greatest loss as a student of geology. That's what I would like to say in terms of geological field works.
Okay.
Okay.
Madhu, the other set of questions?
Yeah, now the other question is for Aarushie and for Shahin. Aarushie was speaking about training the students to use the new field, the virtual field. The question is, do you think that this digital divide that exists across is going to overwhelm the learning and the training in this area, especially with special reference to a couple of parameters? One is access, obviously, when we talk of the digital divide. The second is, uncomfortable gaze of others, added with the fact that the family background, and like we were all discussing, that the student is not the same in the classroom as they are at home, and the loss of the clean slate that happens when the student enters into the class.
Okay, thank you for the question. I think it's a very insightful question. I would agree that yes, the digital divide can be very overwhelming. And the question here is not just the question of course, the inequalities in access to equipment, but to add to it, I think the digital inequality also is intersecting with other inequalities, right? So what is the amount of space that one has to attend a classroom? What about, the shared negotiations when there are limited number of gadgets at home? What about the regional diversities? We all know that infrastructural development at different places is very different. So I think the intersection of digital divide with many other sorts of inequalities, that gives us a bigger glimpse into the challenges with this education. And I think I really appreciate that the question mentioned the uncomfortable gaze. And I think that's something that we also must understand, that the switching of the video is not just maybe a student not wanting to engage. The switching of the video can be a lot many things, or one not wanting the other to glimpse into maybe one setting, or not being too comfortable in sharing that setting. So I think it calls for all of us to also be very sensitive in why is it that this kind of a gaze could be very uncomfortable? In terms of how can we respond to it? I feel that one common theme across, for me, was a big learning experience to listen to so many professors from the sciences and think about laboratories. But I think one common theme in what all of us spoke was that we are calling for reimagining our pedagogies, reimagining our research. But I think first and foremost, it's also our responsibility to ensure that as much as we are pushing for more creative methods, we also must ensure that this mode is not made more alienating than what it already is. So I think that is a huge responsibility. Yes, we are pushing for more creative mechanisms, but it should not be more alienating than what it already is. So how do we go about it? Do we work with synchronous as well as asynchronous methods? So I mean, students who are probably unable to attend the class do not completely lose out on the lecture. Can we work with multiple asynchronous methods? And also, I think something that Professor Venkatesh mentioned, in his talk, where is the research on low-cost devices, and are we doing our institutions doing adequate surveys? Are students being spoken to understand, what is the challenges that they're facing on a day-to-day level, and how can institutional settings respond to delivering some of those equipments to respond to those challenges? So I think that would be my answer. That yes, we have to be more. We are calling for reimagining our pedagogies and research, but we also have to ensure that this process is not made more alienating than what it already is.
Thank you very much, Aarushie. Shahin, would you like to add something to that?
Yes. I think Dr. Aarushie rightly mentioned. I'll just deal on the other aspect where which is more apt to social work. We place students in agency settings where they get opportunities to work with the homeless population. In some agencies where they work with the transgenders, also persons living with HIV/AIDS, cancer patients, urban homelessness, rural best practices, industry settings, and many on. When I have to, when the student enters into a setting like that, probably she or he happens to see the homeless, here and there. That's part and parcel of everyone's life. But when she interacts as part of a fieldwork practice, she comes and says, "Ma'am, I remember a dialogue which was shared by one of the homeless women. I can go to a public toilet, I can go and do everything, bathe probably, or beg and eat, or whatever it is. But what do I do for my private needs? Don't you think I need a private space?" Now, this kind of sharing is very essential for a social work trainee, which could not be taught through a lecture method or to any kind of a tutoring service. I still remember when the student came and said, "Ma'am, I have seen every day on the same road so many homeless, but I never knew that they had one private need which I did not understand. And I am happy that I understood this as a student." Probably in an advocacy or lobbying initiatives, we need to also put forth this point. That was very intimate when she was sharing. The other one about a person who's living with HIV/AIDS. Now, the person knows fully well, the client whom this student has been conversing with knows very well that, the transmission happened through the spouse. But then she is a mother of two children, and she feels that the family should not become dysfunctional. She tries to somehow suppress this information and takes the family ahead as though everything is normal. Now, how do we teach these things in a lecture is one of the most critical point at this juncture. The woman fully knows that the situation of the entire home, and she knows that if she collapses, if she goes into a tiff tap with her spouse or with her in-laws, the entire family collapses. Now, knowing about gender and the relationships at home and the powerlessness of the women in the family setups. Now, these are some of the things which the social work profession emanates. Similar, so many empty number of examples, I could give you about a group of students had gone for a small trip near the seashore to write down what are the kind of problems the adolescent girls come across in times of disaster. And one little girl said that, "Madam, when there happens, even if I see one tidal wave coming a little harsher, the first thing I do is I shriek. I take both my hands up and I shriek, so that, all the others who are either bathing or sleeping, who are somewhere, understand that there is some risk, and they become alert. And madam, what we take the first thing and run. And she gave up so many guesses for which the students all came up with some right answers, wrong answers. She says, ma'am, for me, my mobile phone is not important. For me, my clothes are not important. What is important is my ration card, which I take, I shriek, and I run, so that everyone from that hamlet runs towards. Then the next question comes, where do you run? Obviously, ma'am, towards the main road where there is a school, there is a corporation school. Now, it is very easy to give a lecture on what is HIV/AIDS, what is cancer, what is urban poverty, what is living like in a rural community. But these experiences give the social work trainee the real life of these stakeholders, and that's essentially, where we need students, no doubt, is in our classrooms, in the fields. Otherwise, they will never come out with full fledged, as rightly said by Professor Ramaswamy sir. How how the interns in medicine, how in interns certain departments, how do they know? You need to feel, you need to share, you need to experience. Only then you will be able to. The basic step in social work profession is rapport. The first thing we teach our students is we have to establish a rapport. How can you even practice social work without establishing a rapport is my big question. And these virtual spaces can never fill in these gaps. You need to have the social work trainees on the field, and they need to connect with all of them. And we want our students back to the classroom. We are trying our best to give these experiences online.
But you all have lived through many tragedies. I can see that the tsunami is something which is very fresh in your memory.
Yes.
We came out of it. We will also come out of the pandemic. But unlike other tragedies that we have faced, I think that the pandemic also holds within it a chance to reinvent a few things. Aarushie started by saying that it gives us a way of looking at our disciplines again. We also see how we can communicate to larger groups of people, and Venkatesh, Chandan, Aditya. I mean, all of y'all have got different ways of communicating in a quote unquote offline mode. When we come back, and we are going to come back, all right, it may not be as soon as 18 days as was promised to us, but we will come back sooner or later, right? But at that time, do we just come back as 2019 people, or are we going to be completely changed by this experience? So let me thank all of you again. You've given all of us and each other a lot of things to think about. Please share with us any other additional tools that you feel could be of interest to the wider community. Please join in on default, on Slack, on the Google Groups pages, where you can just go and give information, or maybe there's even things that you would like to pick up from others. As I keep realizing over and over again, the job of being a teacher is over and above whether you are a science teacher or a social science teacher or what have you. I mean, the concerns that we share of communicating and telling our students what we know, and just transmitting it, that overrides the particular discipline. So here there are lots of tools and things that are available for all of us to share with. And thank you for being generous with your time and with all your wisdom that you have shared with all of us. Thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Madhurima. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thank you,
Thank you very much. It
Professor
was quite an
Madhurima,
enriching
for the
experience and learning.
opportunity.